this new video of Salesforce interview questions, which covers developer, admin, and app builder. Unlike any other interview questions, this is more detailed answers, well categorized and approach based, and also we'll discuss about the best considerations for the each questions, which talks specifically precisely to what is asked and what you can explain for that question. So not many questions, but I have 4 to 5 questions in this video. We'll go in detail, so that way it will help you in answering in your interviews, which are very commonly asked, and definitely one of these questions will be there in any interview. So without further delay, let's start it. Okay, what are governor limits? Definitely this is a must ask question in every interview, and they can also ask, describe and give some example. Okay, so first of all, let's go with the definition. What are governor limits? It's kind of a runtime limits imposed by Salesforce. Since it's a multi-tenant architecture, there are so many other tenants which are using that cloud space, so that's why the limits are introduced, and no single transaction can monopolize the shared resources in such a multi-tenant environment. Okay, and what is the purpose? And it's basically to maintain the stability in the performance, and also it's ensures the fair usage among all the tenants who are sharing the platform. And also, if there is any bad design or the bad code which is running excessively in loops, it also prevents those kind of usage, so that the system resources are not choked up. And some of the examples, if you have to give, one is like SQL queries, which you might have seen or faced in your work experience before, and also the DML statements, which is 150 per transaction, and also the CPU time, which are I have listed some of the commonly occurring governor limits error, which you might be familiar with, and also the heap size, which is like 6 MB for synchronous and 12 MB for asynchronous, and also the integration callouts, HTTP callouts, which is 100 per transaction. And also, if it is a batch apex, up to 5 batches can be queued at an active, which is for an active job at a time. And also, best practice that we can talk about is use a bulkified code to handle the multiple records at once, so that you don't have to do DMLs frequently, and also collect and process the record together. So, and avoid SQL and DML statement inside the loop. This is one of the basic. I don't think you can miss this point. This is definitely a good win for that question. Okay, and using collections and the maps, lookups instead of repeated queries. Of course, since it's a, if you are issuing a SQL query, it goes as a transaction and hits the governor limits. Definitely you cannot use that, but instead you can query once, take it into collection, and then sub query, not subquery, I would say, take the records that you specifically need from that collections without hitting any governor limits. You can put it in the loop using those collections and then work around based on your logic. And also asynchronous, you can leverage the asynchronous processing, which we have batch, queuable and feature methods. There is also a schedulable apex if you want to mention that. And also you can use the aggregate queries when possible, where you can just take the count, you can take the sum, like that. So that way you can avoid governor limits, and it's kind of a best use of best practice for using not hitting the governor limits basically. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, which is nothing but difference between the trigger and the flow. Or explain what scenarios you would prefer the flow instead of trigger. The flow is kind of replacement for the workflows and process builder. I don't see anybody asking about the workflows and process builder anymore, so it will be more of a flow questions. Okay, so to start with, trigger, it's a code, and the flow is like a declarative automation tool that you can build to execute your logic. It can do all sorts of things which trigger can do, but trigger is more versatile. It can do a lot more things a flow can do. So basically, if you take trigger execution context, it runs in the backend invisible to the user, while flow is also invisible, runs in the backend, but there is a screen flow which runs in the UI. And in terms of flexibility and control, trigger can perform complex jobs that I already explained, and multi-object and the cross-transaction logic integrate with the APIs and fine-grained data manipulation and all sorts of the things that you can do. So basically, there is no limit that you can do in trigger or in the code, I would say, but in the flow, it has some limitation. But still, with recent updates and Salesforce has added a lot of features to the flow, which is kind of heavily loaded, which can do pretty complex processing. But for such complex thing, I would rather prefer trigger than the flow, because it might hang the system, or it might be less efficient to handle the extremely large and complex data manipulation compared to the Apex. So flow is better for fairly simple, like UI based steps, and also if you have to just update a related record, or if you want to do some capture into variable and do some processing and update some other records or create some records. And also you can call subflows to handle the load, but yeah, trigger can do a lot more than the flow. And in terms of use cases, trigger has a complex multi-object logic that you can handle in trigger and update related across different object and the multiple condition, like I said, and call the external APIs from the backend, and enforcing complex validation rules which you cannot define in the declarative validation rules that you have on the object. And flow can automate the approval process and the guided UI steps, update the related records without any code. It's just like updating the parent and the child, or update the parent and the other related object lookup using the lookup relationship, and also gather the user input from the UI and dynamically create records. Like you can create contacts using the already entered accounts by prompting the user to select the account and enter the first name, last name, and the email. Boom, you have the contact created. So that's about it. And moving on, we have the question on the bulk data loads in Salesforce, and also your approach to managing the large scale data import in Salesforce. So to start with, first, you have to assess and prepare the data first. With that, what you will do is validate what data you need against the Salesforce metadata, that is the data type length and the mandatory fields that you have in Salesforce, and also cleanse and deduplicate to avoid unnecessary duplicate error or errors. Basically, that will help in smooth loading of the data. Otherwise, you will end up in error and fixing the data on the fly. And next one, ensure the lookup relations external ID are already mapped, that you have some multi-object data that you are loading, and make sure your lookup relationship IDs are populated in those objects data, and also the external IDs if you are tracking for tracking from the other source system that you want to track in Salesforce. Okay, and choose the right tool. What tool you choose? Data loader. Data loader is for the large volumes, millions of records. If you have to load, then use the data loader. Otherwise, you have the data import wizard for the smaller loads, like few hundreds, thousands of loads, which any admin can do. And also like a third-party ETL tools, Informatica, MuleSoft, Jitterbit, or even Delbumi is for main integration, but you can use in some cases. It's basically for the loading which happens ongoing, and it has a complex data mapping requirements that has to be done on the flow. You can configure that in these tools, and that way it will be a smooth data load of bulk data. And also you can leverage the bulk APIs for large data set and the better performance. And to handle large data volumes efficiently, you can use the batch apex for processing within the governor limits. Um, and also you have a queuable apex, and also if you want to process large data set, just break them into manageable chunks like 200 records per batch. That way, you are not overloading into a single batch. And in terms of performance consideration, if you are doing the bulk data load, disable the unnecessary workflows or validation rules or any triggers that runs which may not be needed for the bulk data load. It mainly used for the transaction data, but you can uh, once the data is loaded, you can do the bulk update of sorts. But while uploading, it might cause unnecessary errors, and you will have to fix and go with every errors that might come up. So it's not a clean approach, I would say. And avoid complex automation during data load to prevent performance bottlenecks, which means it can be a complex flow or any after save triggers or trigger handlers that's running, which will cause bottlenecks after the data loading, and it's going to be very heavy on the system. So better, if you are using a trigger, you use that. Using the trigger variables, you can disable the trigger handler being called from the trigger. So you can think of like that if you have not already configured in the trigger. That way it will be very simple and straightforward. And use the before save flow for minimal overhead. If you use after save flow, it's going to be like you'll have to do the DML twice, but if it is before save, before inserting, you can save it in the before save flow. That way it will be one database operation per se. And moving on, this is about integration question. Explain the key consideration when integrating the Salesforce with the external system. And here we have to first understand the requirement first and define the integration goals, like what data needs to be exchanged, how often, in which direction, whether it's inbound or the outbound, and identify the real time versus batch needs, whether you can do it in real time or the batch mode. And also the security and authentication is something very important. They definitely dig deeper into these topics when it comes to integration, that we have to be prepared. And we'll talk about the integration methods, whether it's a REST API, which is one of the popular method if it is a real-time integration, and also SOAP API if it is complex integration and requires strongly typing and needs the transactional integrity. And also we have bulk API, API2 for high volume data transfer, which may not be suitable for the real time. And we have streaming API and platform event for near real time updates, not the real time like REST API, but yeah, you can use these event driven integration also. And change data capture, which I don't see commonly used in every hour, but you can use it for the automatic updates when the record change. And coming to tools that you can use, like we already discussed in the previous question, MuleSoft, Informatica, Jitterbit, and Dell Boomi, or any other integration platforms to handle all the mapping or any data transformation that you have to do, and also better error management. And it also helps in retries, and also in retries you have certain number of retries that you can do if you are integrating without these middlewares. But with middlewares you can handle the retries better, and also the logging. And you can scaling is if you have a hub and spoke architecture, you can basically extract data once and then distribute it to multiple systems. That way it will be very useful. You don't have to do it for every other system. And then coming to the security consideration, which is very important, you can say OAuth for the API authentication, and if it is for field level security and IP restrictions or encryption wherever needed, and also compliance with the data protection rules like GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which is mainly for European Union, but if you can think about other country regulation like for US or any other Asian countries, that will also be useful to answer these questions, because security and the authentication is what something they are more interested in when consider when talking about the integration, that specifically in the interviews. So yeah, that's about these questions for the admin, developer, as well as app builder interviews. So hope this is helpful. I'll see you in another video with more detailed approach of how you can answer those questions. So till then, see you. Bye bye.